Welcome to part 2 of A Tale of Two Shows, enabling remote theatrical performance during the coronavirus pandemic. In this part, we're going to talk about the implementation and testing of the remote performance system used in the SUNY Oneonta Theater Department's Fall 2020 shows. So at the end of the previous video, we were looking at this diagram, this exploratory diagram of a remote performance system that could be used to achieve all the goals that we established at the beginning. This diagram right here is essentially a stripped down version of that. And if you recall from the research, the option we were exploring called capturing individual callers, this is essentially the exact same thing. The only difference is now we've added to it the separate computers that each of our video conferencing calls are taking place on, because we need a separate computer for each of those video calls to occur. So this diagram now shows those interface computers on the diagram. And also now it's showing the use of breakout rooms, so Zoom breakout rooms or video conferencing breakout rooms instead of separate calls, because in practice that's just a lot less work to implement than sort of hosting separate meetings for every individual participant. So if you're using a platform that has breakout rooms, you can just use a breakout room for each one of your separate computers. The other thing we've added to this diagram is the captioning solution. So we were anticipating adding captioning to our live shows, so we've added that onto this diagram. So what we're going to do now is go through the parts of the system, highlighting each of them, and talk about how we went through and actually implemented it for our use. And we're going to start off with the network switch. So the network switch is key to the entire system. All of our network video and audio has to be transmitted between computers, and it has to go through a network switch in order to do that. So it also has to provide a connection to the outside internet, so that the Zoom calls can occur, and of course our live streaming can happen. So without a network switch that could actually interface with our college's network, there's no way we could proceed with our system at all. So that's where we're going to start. Fortunately for us, our college's networking and telecom department made everything completely possible, with approval from the department director, Leslie Bidwell. Our network support specialist, Damon Madison, configured a network switch for us and provided it to us. We set it up in our old TV studio that's connected to our black box theater. So we just installed it on a shelf in there and connected the switch into the college's network. And then, we're all set up to connect all of our separate computers. This is the specific model of switch that we used. You do not need power over Ethernet for this. If you're going to get yourself a switch, we're not providing power to Wi-Fi routers or anything like that, so you don't need PoE. This one, I found this specific one online. There was a listing I found for about $650. I don't know what other kind of software might be required, because there's configuration of this that may have to be done through software on a connected computer. I'm not familiar with what's involved in that, because fortunately we had Damon, our network support specialist, who could help us out with that. So this is the switch we used and how we got it. Next in the system is what I'm calling the studio mixing computer. So this is the computer that runs our broadcast software. This computer is the brains of the entire system. It's what's receiving all the video, composing it together, sending it back out. So it has to be able to handle all that video, audio network traffic, the mixing, potentially live streaming and recording. So you need a powerful workstation for this. A laptop is not enough to do that job. Fortunately for us, we already had a powerful desktop computer in our department. It was built to run intensive software and multiple displays. It was actually built to run, 3D intensive CAD software, Vectorworks, for those of you in theater that are familiar with that. And these are the specific model and specs of our computer. So you can see we're running 32 gigs of RAM with dedicated 1 gig of video RAM on the graphics card as well. So part of the studio mixing computer setup is, of course, the broadcast software that you're using. For us, we chose to go with vMix. Again, one of the main reasons was the price for the feature set, and based on that, its ability to help us meet all of those goals that we had at the beginning. Some of the things that stood out for me were the video processing and compositing capabilities, the ability to green screen, to do color corrections, to layer in different elements, to move them around the screen. Also, the audio routing and processing. It has a lot of functionality for auxiliary audio buses, for automatic muting, for EQ, for noise gate, compression. It has a lot of audio options. It has a lot of output, recording, and streaming options as well. It also has shortcuts, triggers, and scripts, so there's lots of ways you can sort of automate and customize actions. It's pretty user-friendly. It has a pretty feature-rich interface. It has NDI support. It also has the option of vMix call, which, if you're not familiar, some broadcast software providers also have their own video conferencing application that go with their broadcast software. So vMix has vMix call, so you can actually use their video conferencing application to bring guests into vMix if you want to. The problem is you are kind of limited in the number of callers, and the number of callers is also dependent on your license level. So depending on how many actors you have, vMix call is actually not useful as an alternative to Zoom or one of the other major, video conferencing applications. And the last thing is vMix is also one-time purchase. You don't need to be, paying for a renewable subscription with vMix. This is just a little look at the how we set up the mixing computer initially. So what you're seeing here is on the main display, we have the main vMix window. On the top left here, we're seeing the preview area of vMix. So this is showing basically what is waiting to go live to the audience. And then in the middle here we have our sort of go buttons and transition controls, and on the top right here is the current cue output. So that's showing us what the audience is currently seeing. And then we have all of our different video inputs and different elements down at the bottom. On our top monitor here, we have a multi-view from vMix, so that's allowing us to see essentially a little snapshot of all of our inputs, what is in preview, what's waiting in preview, what the audience is currently seeing. It's also showing us our control room web camera, which we have right here. On our left monitor, we have our vMix audio controls, so all of our different channels of audio are controlled here. We've got our Zoom, we have a Zoom call up and running on this monitor as well. And then on the right monitor here, we have our digital show script. So the script for the show that we're working on. In this case, this is the script for Medea. And we also have the network usage, the network monitor open in Windows Task Manager, just to kind of keep an eye on our network usage. And then here is our control room headphones and mic for interacting with everyone else who is in vMix, coming into vMix from our video calls. So that's how we set up our computer initially. It's very, very useful to have, I would say, at least 3 widescreen monitors. It just gives you so much more capability in terms of seeing everything that you need to see. So the next part of the system here is going to be our Zoom license, because we need to have access to our our video conferencing application in order to use it to bring video into the broadcast software. So fortunately for us, the college already had a handful of Zoom licenses, and our Chief Information Officer, Steve Maniscalco, assigned us one of those licenses so that we could use it for the show. So why did we choose Zoom? Besides everybody is using Zoom, there are reasons a lot of people are using Zoom. Zoom has lots of really useful video and audio settings, and some of the other providers out there are a little limited or maybe more cumbersome in sort of the options they give you with video and audio adjustments. Zoom does have quite good breakout room functionality. So, if you want to break a meeting down into a bunch of sub meetings, it's really good for that. As of partway through our rehearsal process, Zoom also allows rearrangement of the gallery view. So that's very useful during rehearsal if you're trying to sort of customize the position of your actors on screen during your rehearsal process. Zoom actually allows that gallery view to be rearranged, which is nice. And Zoom, of course, does have recording, captioning, and streaming integration as well. Not that we were taking advantage of any of those, but it is, it is something to consider. Zoom actually even has the ability to assign a participant in the Zoom call to be a captioner and to generate or write captions for everybody else. Why use breakout rooms? As we mentioned before, we don't have to use separate video calls or meetings. It's way more convenient to use breakout rooms than to start a bunch of separate meetings, and it's very convenient to send everyone back to the main meeting when your rehearsal is over, so they can do notes with the director or whatever they need to do. They don't necessarily have to stay in the breakout rooms, as part of the remote performance system. They can just go back to the main Zoom meeting and all chat with each other there. So that main meeting can sort of serve as a green room of sorts where the actors can hang out. This is just a couple looks at what our system looked like when we were implementing our breakout rooms. So you have all the participants in the Zoom call here, and then they're all assigned to the different breakout rooms on the right here. So the next part of the system, highlighted in blue here, are the interface computers, the interface laptops. This diagram only shows 3 actors here, but we actually had 9 actors in both of our 2 shows. So we actually had 9 interface computers that we needed to get. And it's always good to have a backup computer on hand, so we requested 10 laptops. And laptops are perfectly fine for this task. What they need to do can be demanding, but it's a lot more manageable than what, say, the mixing computer needs to do. So a laptop can do this job. Whenever we need computers or video projectors, we call our technology services manager, Mark English, and he usually helps us out with whatever we need. And he had 10 computers to us really quickly. And these are the specs on those computers if you want to take a look at that more closely. So when we set up our interface computers, we got them set up in our studio, all plugged in, receiving power, and got them connected to the network switch using Ethernet cable. To identify each one of our computers, initially we set the desktop background to a sort of a silhouette of a person with a number, so we could identify that machine. If you'd like to download copies of these desktop backgrounds, they're 16:9 ratio, and you can download them from this link here in a zip folder. And the other thing we did with these is configured them to automatically launch only the necessary software. We stored our Zoom meeting links in the browser bookmarks, so we could get to them quickly. Every time you use the system, you're going to have to turn all of these computers on, log into them, launch the software you want, shut down the software you don't want. So any of that you can automate, or you can have the computer set up to just do it. Definitely do that. And here are some useful shortcuts you may find if you're a Windows user and you're using Zoom. These shortcuts I found particularly useful for rapidly going down the line and doing things with the computers. Okay, next part, we need to capture the video and the audio from the actors to get it onto the network for the mixing computer to use. So how do we do that capturing process? So we started with a tool called Scan Converter. Scan Converter basically captures the full or partial computer display plus the computer's audio, and then it converts it into an NDI video/audio feed. So it's a very simple free application you can download from this link. It shows up in the system tray. You enable the audio, and that's basically it. It'll produce an NDI feed available on the network, capturing the video and audio. So one point about this, though, is Scan Converter captures the system audio. So that means you can't mute or reduce the volume of the laptop speakers without essentially cutting out your sound capture. So in order to make sure we didn't have 10 computers all, making noise in the studio, having the actors' voices coming out of every one of these computers, we stuck a dummy plug, or you could plug a pair of headphones into the stereo jack. So that just makes the computer think it's connected to external speakers, and then you're not having to listen to the audio coming out of that computer anymore. So it's sort of muting physically instead of muting the speakers, because we need that system audio to be at 100% so we can send it over the network. Okay, so we've captured our audio and video from the computer, the interface laptops. Now we need to get it back to the interface laptops and back into Zoom. So how do we do that? So similarly, a very simple free software tool. This one's called Virtual Input. It's an application that makes any NDI video or audio source available as an input for any program that supports a webcam or a microphone. So what that looks like here is you essentially, it'll show up in your system tray, and you click on it and you find a computer on the network. So in this case, this is our mixing computer right here. So you find the device on the network, and then you look at the different NDI feeds that are available coming from that device. So this, for example, here is vMix output 2. That's an NDI feed from the mixing computer, and we just select it. That's what we want to use. So that is where Virtual Input is getting its video and audio from. We've chosen the NDI feed that it's going to make available to other software programs. And the main one we're worried about is Zoom. So the next thing we need to do is go into Zoom and choose New Tech NDI for the microphone input, and we would do the same thing for the video. You would see line New Tech NDI video would show up for the camera. So essentially what we're doing is telling Zoom, instead of using the camera's built-in microphone or webcam, I want you to use this video and audio feed that is coming from this network source somewhere else. So that's what we're doing with Virtual Input, which again can be downloaded from this link right here. Okay, well, the next part of this system is captioning and live streaming. So streaming, is very easy for most broadcast programs. That's what they're set up to do. So there's going to be options in the software, to send your video out to ultimately a live stream. And we obtained permission to use our college's YouTube channel to do the streaming. So that's why we're planning to use YouTube. Captioning for accessibility, as we said in part one, that's important, but it can be tricky to implement for a live show. What we chose to do, based on all the research we did about captioning, which again you can find in the part one video, we anticipated essentially adding open captions to our video feed. So we would have a separate captioning computer that would take our production video, resize it just a little bit, add captions across the bottom, and then send that captioned feed out to a separate YouTube stream. So we would have two different YouTube streams, one that is captioned and one that is not. All right, the last part of our implementation here is, of course, the actors themselves. So theoretically, any internet-connected device with a camera and a microphone enables an actor to participate in this context, right? You just need to participate in a Zoom meeting. So, you only need to, their device only needs to run Zoom, essentially. In practice, though, the internet connection and the device type and quality is kind of important to ensure their success in interacting with this system. Supporting actors at home is an extensive endeavor, and we're going to get into it a little more later on in part 3. Where we talk about using the remote performance system. But for now, we're going to mostly just focus on what our goals are for an actor's internet and device at home in order to interact with this system. So this is the list that I came up with in terms of what to prioritize or what our goals should be. And the first one is high-speed cable or fiber optic internet. So if we can avoid anything that is, like DSL, I don't think anyone's using dial-up anymore, but who knows? DSL, satellite, cellular hotspot. Those are all things we want to try to avoid in order to to have the best internet connection available in order for them to participate successfully over video conferencing. Another one is access to the modem or router to connect via Ethernet cable rather than via Wi-Fi if possible. So that would be a goal. If we could achieve internet connections with the actors directly instead of by Wi-Fi, that might enable a more stable and reliable connection than Wi-Fi, which would help, again, it would help them be successful in performing remotely. And then a laptop or a desktop computer with a well-supported operating system, up to date, and preferably a computer, just as a ballpark, manufactured in the last 5 years. If an actor is using something that's maybe, say, pushing 10 years old, it could be starting to have performance issues that might cause problems. So, if a computer can be, fairly recent, or at least not too old, that would be good. Obviously, we need to have the ability to download and run the video conferencing software, and then a working camera and a microphone. That could be internal, an internal or external, as long as there's an ability to capture sound and an ability to appear on camera. That's kind of what we need as a minimum. Okay, so last couple parts about implementing our system. One of our goals at the beginning was to enable remote operation of our system so that our remote stage manager and operator technician could be involved in the show, in the operation of the show. So how could we do that? How can we add that on to what we already have kind of drawn out here? And the answer that we pursued was the idea of essentially letting the broadcast, the mixing computer that's running the broadcast software, participate in the same Zoom call and join its own Zoom breakout room with the stage manager and then the operator. And then what we would do is share the screen, share the vMix screen with the participants of the breakout room, and also use virtual audio patch cords to route sound between vMix and the Zoom and Zoom, so that the stage manager and operator could hear things from vMix and also talk to people through vMix. So this is how we proposed to set up our remote operation. And the operating part of that happens again through screen sharing. The operator requests control of the screen of the mixing computer and then uses Zoom screen control to operate vMix. All that being said, you still want to have a local operator in the studio kind of sitting over the mixing computer ready to, to assist should there be any issues with the remote operation. So just if you're not aware what virtual patch cords are, take a look at this. I'm not going to go into depth here, but a virtual patch cord there is a way of routing sound around the within a computer. So it'll just add an audio device to your computer with an input and an output, and you can route sound between different applications. So if you're trying to get sound from your broadcast software into a video conference call, all running on the same computer, a virtual patch cord can be a nice easy way to do that. And the ones that I used were by VB Audio, but you can find them by other providers as well. Okay, so the last part of our implementation here, we need to add our other production staff, or anyone who needs to essentially observe rehearsal or observe the performance, or potentially need to be interactive with the performance system. We need to add them in as well. So it's kind of fairly straightforward. We're basically just adding another interface computer to the system with a Zoom breakout room again. But in this case, we actually have multiple participants inside of the Zoom breakout room. So in this case, if you're bringing the video into vMix, you might actually be getting, say, the gallery view from Zoom, or whatever particular individual you decided to pin in Zoom is the person's video you would be getting. So, if you do this and you want the video being brought in, I'm just saying that you have to control who is on screen using the options in Zoom. Another thing you could do, and actually what this kind of shows you as well, is that you could actually bring multiple actors into any one of these Zoom breakout rooms if you wanted to. If you wanted to add, sort of expand the functionality of your system without adding separate computers, you could let there be multiple actors in any individual interface computer. The problem is you start having to control the screen of Zoom on each of these individual computers, depending on whether you want all those actors shown on screen together or not. From scene to scene, you might need to change who is pinned on screen, that sort of thing. So, but if you have the technicians and the labor to kind of manage, these different computers and who is pinned or who's in gallery view or who's visible or not, you can add a lot of additional actors to your setup without adding additional computers. So that's something to think about. Also a note, you could add any of these sort of technicians or designers into any of these breakout rooms with an actor if you wanted to, just to let them, to get as a quick way to bring them in and be able to observe what the actors are seeing. You would just want to pin the actor's video, so you're only getting the actor's video into the input. So it does make it makes it a little more awkward maybe to communicate with that director or designer or technician if they're sharing the room with the actor. But it is an option. If you don't want to set up a separate computer, you could let them sort of piggyback with the actors in their breakout rooms if you wanted to. Okay, so that brings us to the end of the implementation phase. So we walked through the whole system and all the different parts of it and how we put it together. So now we need to start testing that and see if it's going to really do what we think it's going to do. That was the next phase for us. So the first thing, of course, we started with testing-wise was testing, speech. How is talking through this system going to work? And the first thing that I was a little bit concerned about was echo cancellation, because if you think about the way this system is set up, you're essentially taking the voices of the actors, you're capturing it, bringing it into the broadcast software, and then you're sending that audio back to the actors because they all need to hear each other. That includes their own voices. So each actor is receiving their own voice back to themselves. And one of the big things we want to make sure we don't have happen is echo. We want to make sure that the actor's own voice is going to be canceled out when it is sent back to them. And that's the first thing we found was the case when we did testing with speech. The video conferencing application, so in this case Zoom, was canceling out our own voice being sent back to us. At times we could hear for a fraction of a second our own voice, but it typically cut it out almost immediately and then we didn't hear it again. If a lot of time went by, maybe you would hear that cancellation effect again, but it was very, very minimal. So the good thing is that Zoom was canceling out that echo, so we didn't have to worry about an echo occurring. The next thing we looked at was delay and synchronicity. So we tested that one of the ways we tested that was by having one person count while showing their fingers to the screen simultaneously, and then somebody on the other end of the call verbally counted those numbers out as they saw the person's fingers raised on screen to kind of see how in line were they with each other or not. And as you would expect, they were not really in sync. They weren't absurdly far apart from each other, but they were certainly not in sync. There was a delay going on for sure of a second or so. It's hard to say exactly, but there was definitely a delay going on. And then another thing we kind of tested with initially was what kind of pacing was possible. So we read sections of the My Father's Dragon script and tried to put as small a gap as possible between different lines to see how quickly the lines could be delivered. And what we found was that you really didn't want to wait at all. You didn't want to put a natural pause after the end of someone speaking before you started speaking. Otherwise, it would sort of be perceived as a longer delay, on the studio side of things. So, in order to keep gaps between speech tight, you almost need to just start speaking on the last word or two of the person before you, which is a little odd, but that caused audio to come through with kind of the minimal amount of gaps between lines. So that's what we found in our initial speech testing. So the next thing we did was to stress out the system. And I'm going to show you a little video clip of this because it's kind of amusing. So let's cut to that. So what you were seeing there was a YouTube video playing on each individual interface computer, and that video and audio was being captured over into vMix. That's the initial test that I did, but after that I went further and made sure I had Zoom running on I made sure that we had Zoom running on each of those computers as well, so that it was more reflective of everything we were going to be asking the laptops to do. And the purpose of this was to look at how stressed the individual interface computers and the mixing computer, how stressed are they, how much network data are they using, in order to try to assess, whether this was going to work or not. So, and it seemed pretty good in doing those tests. One of the issues we were having with the laptops is it seemed like this thing called anti-malware, which is part of Windows Defender or Windows Firewall, was contributing quite a bit to CPU usage on the laptops, but it was still, it didn't seem too bad initially. So another way we tested the system was to actually start using it in our rehearsal process. So this is our first rehearsal with Medea. Medea was the first show in our schedule, so it was a little ahead of where My Father's Dragon was. And what we did for our first rehearsal, we went through and set up some basic layouts of the actors for some of the different scenes, and then we just we did some very basic switches between layouts as they worked through and rehearsed the show. So I'm going to show you a couple of video clips here from this first rehearsal so you can kind of see how it went and what was involved. So the first thing here is a little recording test I'm doing where I'm just testing, making sure that the vMix is recording the actors correctly. Recording of all of us on screen here, so we can all just wave to the camera. Hi. Everybody can say hi, so I make sure I get everybody's audio.
Hi. Hello.
Okay, so I'm doing a test recording. No. I am stopping the test. So that was just a little test recording with everyone as we brought them into vMix for the first time. Make sure recording before we started rehearsal. And then here is our first, this is some video from our second vMix rehearsal. And I'm going to play this and just scrub through this a little bit just so you can kind of see how what was involved and how it went.
And also, is it possible to time
the daughter of Peleus to kill their father? Even if Jason is in quarrel with their mother, will he allow his own son?
Why hurry death?
Don't pray for this. If your husband worships at a new bed, do not be sharp with him.
Very rough layouts, in these first rehearsals just to get the right people on screen.
Partner. Of all who live and can think, we women are the most miserable species.
I fear you. No need at all to cloak my words. Depends on the circumstances.
Do you think I would ever fawn on that man without some profit or plan? I would not have spoken or ever from Helios the sun.
Grease flown into the ether.
Unhappy woman, you cannot find shelter from your troubles on your father's shore.
So that just gives you a little taste of how that those first couple rehearsals with the show went for Medea. So one of the big things we learned right away had to do with mirroring of the actor video, or the video being sent back to the actors. So initially, we were sending the actors the exact same video that their camera was giving us. So essentially the same video that the audience was seeing. And if we were performing in person, this would be akin to essentially an actor standing on the stage looking at the audience while simultaneously sitting in the audience looking at the stage. It's kind of a trippy thing. And it's unsettling because you're seeing yourself live without mirroring that we would naturally expect to see. Like if we were looking at a piece of glass or the surface of a pond or something, you would expect there to be mirroring, and it's unsettling if there isn't. So one thing that resulted in was actually actors looking the wrong way when trying to direct their attention toward other actors on screen. So in this example right here, these two actors should be looking toward each other, and Peter here is directing his attention toward where Deanna is on her screen. So on his screen, Deanna was to his right, so he directed his attention that way. But because we weren't sending him mirrored video, he's actually directing his attention the wrong direction. So you can kind of play with this a little yourself if you open like the camera on the selfie camera on your phone, and you'll notice that when you turn your head with your selfie camera on your phone, your face and your face on camera turns the same direction, right? So what is happening when you try this, like with your cell phone selfie camera, the software on your cell phone is mirroring the video. It's causing the display of your phone to function like a mirror, you know, which is what we expect. That's what feels natural. The issue that we had is that our broadcast software wasn't doing that automatically. So we had to, implement a solution to cause that to occur. And I won't go into the particulars of this. If you're using vMix, you can look at this more closely, but because vMix doesn't really have a straightforward answer to this. But the mirror my video option in Zoom does not solve this problem because that only mirrors video being received from other participants in the Zoom call. It doesn't mirror your own video that is being sent out elsewhere. Or sorry, I said that backwards. It's it mirrors video being received from other participants in the Zoom call, only your own. So if you check mirror my video in Zoom, it's only affecting your own preview of yourself in Zoom. So it doesn't solve this problem. It'd be awesome if you could just check a box in Zoom and it would solve this problem, but it really doesn't. So we figured out a way to enable mirroring in vMix. That was a little awkward, but it worked just fine. So that's what we did. So as we went through our testing here, we started to encounter some problems. One was with scan converter freezing and crashing on the interface laptops, and vMix was also crashing on us occasionally as well. It really wasn't clear what the problem was that was causing this. It really kind of seemed like high CPU usage was a factor because Windows Firewall, Windows Defender, and this Antimalware process seemed to really be contributing a lot to the CPU usage, and it was getting quite high. But IT added an exception for scan converter, to Windows Defender, and it didn't really make any difference at all. Looking into it further, the vMix forums made it sound like vMix doesn't play very well with scan converter, and vMix actually offers its own desktop capture application as an alternative to scan converter called vMix Desktop Capture. So what we did is just switched from scan converter to vMix Desktop Capture, and all those issues pretty much went away. Like vMix didn't crash anymore. There was no interruptions in the NDI feeds or anything. vMix Desktop Capture didn't crash. It ran just fine. So that switching applications seemed to solve that problem. The other problem we started to run into, which based on the research maybe we could have said was inevitable, but was a bandwidth problem. So most computers have a network interface card that allows up to 1 GB per second bandwidth limit. Essentially, the amount of data it can transmit is 1 GB per second. And we were actually reaching that limit on the mixing computer. We were seeing it both in the Windows Task Manager, and also Damon, our network support specialist, was seeing it by monitoring the network usage of our network switch. So we were getting really close to 1 GB per second. Oddly, this didn't seem to be adversely affecting NDI transmission. Like, we weren't having video, stop working or anything like that. but we were momentarily and periodically reaching that limit. So we definitely needed more bandwidth for safety and for the other things we were going to need to do, like live streaming. There is a link here if you want to read a little more about NDI and bandwidth in the vMix forums. Check out that link there. So initially, I hoped that we could just add a second network card to the mixing computer and then bridge the two connections together in Windows. That did not work. We had issues in Windows and with administrative access and all this nonsense. But if you're thinking about expanding your network capability, look up bridging versus teaming or bonding of network connections. Do a little more research on that to observe the differences between that. We really needed to team our network connections together, not use the bridging feature in Windows. And fortunately, ITS came to the rescue here. Specifically, again, Damon, but also Anthony Beltucci and Logan Hazard. They ended up installing a dual-port server-grade network card onto the mixing computer, along with an accompanying software that could team those network adapters together. And that actually gave us then an upgrade to essentially 2 gigabytes per second of bandwidth. And if we had wanted to add in the third port, we could have gone up to 3 gigabytes per second. So what by 3 ports, I mean the 2 in the card and then the pre-existing one in the computer's motherboard. So we could have gone up to 3 gigabytes per second if we needed to. One point to mention here is that the reason why we could do this, like NDI can be split across multiple network connections if they are teamed together. So NDI will continue to function if we sort of spread the traffic out across multiple network connections that are teamed together. This is the result of our bandwidth upgrade, looking at the dress rehearsal for My Father's Dragon, as well as the final dress rehearsal while we were live streaming. And you can see, the traffic in and the traffic out and the combined, and, we were using the system, fairly constantly, around 1.5 gigabytes per second, but we really never found it necessary to exceed the 2 gigabytes per second that we had available. So, so the networking upgrade worked. It solved our problems with bandwidth, gave us more room to transmit data across the studio. Another thing came up in the testing phase. If you're getting computers from your centralized, ITS service or IT service, it may have some sort of automation in place to perform updates. And those pop-ups, there was really nothing we could do about them. IT couldn't even necessarily do anything about them, and they pop up in front of the screen. So if you're capturing the screen to send it over to your broadcast software, you don't really want an update pop-up to show up. So we essentially made sure that we turned our computers on regularly at the time recommended by IT, at least once a week, to give them a chance to update if they needed to, outside of our rehearsal or performance use. A few peculiarities about Zoom here. Some things that we experienced in testing and rehearsal and stuff. One was an audio distortion issue. Occasionally we'd have an actor develop a really sort of devilish distortion. I'm going to play you a little sample of that right now.
Impunity, throw me out of here. That's the way it is. Go on. Call me Elias if you wish, and Tuscansilla.
Yeah, it's really annoying to have to listen to that. And once it starts, it seems to just stay until the participant leaves the Zoom meeting and comes back, or leaves the breakout room and comes back. Fortunately, just leaving a breakout room and returning to it seems to solve the problem. So another odd thing was issues with the menu in Zoom not wanting to collapse even when it's in full screen mode. And again, taking the interface computer out of a breakout room and then returning seemed to solve this. It's like it sort of just got stuck and didn't want to collapse. Another thing about full screen mode, on some of our computers, for some reason, there's a little view button in the top right corner that doesn't go away in full screen mode. So it always says view in the top right corner. And the only way we could deal with that was to actually crop the video slightly in vMix so you didn't see that button. I'm not sure why it was there on some computers and not on others. Another thing to keep in mind, I briefly tried sending lower resolution video into Zoom to try to save bandwidth on the network, because virtual input will allow you to send less than HD video. The problem is the only other option really is 480p, which is 4:3 ratio. So Zoom crops the video badly and you lose parts of the screen that the actors need to be able to see. So we had to leave it at 720p 16:9. Another weird thing, sometimes when actors would join breakout rooms, the audio or the video that they were receiving through Zoom from virtual input would be all pink and green and distorted for some reason. Not really sure why, but turning the camera off and back on in Zoom seems to fix it, and the issue remains fixed. So it seemed to only happen really when the actor first joins the breakout room. Another thing we discovered in testing, so when you bring all of your interface laptops into the Zoom call, when you initially do that, they are not assigned or in their breakout rooms yet, right? They're all just in one room together. And if you have 10 computers that are all capturing and rebroadcasting the same audio, because your broadcast program is unmuted if the audio is on in the broadcast software, you're going to get a horrible, it's just going to run away. It's going to peak. It's going to explode. You're just going to have an audio explosion that's going to peak everything out. So those interface laptops are not meant to be in the same breakout room or meeting with one another. And if they are, you need to mute, either mute them or mute those channels or the master bus in vMix. Okay, so as we got further along in our process, again, testing continued with rehearsal, and this time we're looking at the first rehearsal of our production of My Father's Dragon. And similarly to Medea, we created some basic layouts in vMix for these early rehearsals, so we could start putting the actors into the arrangements that were called for, and they could start getting used to that a little bit. I'm going to play you again. I'm going to scrub through some of that rehearsal just so you can see kind of what that was like.
Anything to fly.
Go along. Everything had to be kept very secret. So when they found or bought
bazooka! Completely ugly I am, and I weep all the time.
Dividing it into 3 braids like this and tie a ribbon around the
Having
end.
some internet connection issues in early rehearsal.
First you bring me joy, then bring me sorrow.
Crocodile just reached the other bank.
River all day long.
So that just gives you a little taste of that first rehearsal with My Father's Dragon. And I mentioned internet connection as an issue. You also see example of that in this screenshot here. When Zoom is experiencing low bandwidth, it will often, when it gets bad enough, it will shrink an actor's video down in size. So that's why we're seeing one person here whose video has been reduced down to a smaller size than everyone else, which is a bit of a problem to have happen in the middle of a live performance. You don't want someone's video to suddenly shrink. So that's one thing we were experiencing in our first rehearsals, and in this case it was related to the type of internet connection being used in this early rehearsal process, and internet connections issues with them were resolved as we got later in the process. Another thing that we did some testing of was with green screen replacement. So the question was, how sensitive is the success of the green screen replacement to different lighting conditions, camera exposure, movements of the actors, their proximity to the camera. Essentially, what we discovered was that low and very bright light is a problem. So if it's too dark, you get a lot of shadows in the extents of your green screen that the software has trouble replacing the background. And you can kind of see that happening in this test video here, where the pleats are in shadow. You can see that the software has more trouble replacing that part of the background. You have the same problem if it's too bright, because you get these overexposed spots on the backdrop, and the software doesn't know what to do with that. So another part of this, so what I'm testing right there is to see what happens when actors get really close and when they kind of move around a lot. One of my big concerns, was as dynamic as the show was going to be in terms of what the actors are doing, all kinds of things with props and moving forward and away. How was the green screen replacement going to handle that? And then also what happens with objects that are green. So there are some dark green colored leaves that you can kind of see are being intermittently replaced, and they're also sort of becoming desaturated because of the green screen replacement going on. So depending on the strength of the chroma key setting, you may experience more or less of green objects also being replaced along with the background. That's what we found in our testing. The next part of our testing was to do with the remote cue calling and operation. So for those that are less initiated with theater, the stage manager's main responsibility during a show is to command when things are supposed to happen, and operators and technicians have to be able to respond to those commands to do whatever is being asked. So the stage manager needs isolated, open communication with all of those other people to be able to trade clear instructions and acknowledgments. So those words are usually stand by this thing, and then somebody will say that thing is standing by, and then the stage manager will say this thing go. And so they need to have these very clear instructions happening. So we needed to do a test of our Zoom breakout room and screen sharing idea for this cue calling and operation. So we set up a test to do that with the stage manager and an operator at home. And it also doubled as a training session for our stage manager and our operator, particularly our stage manager, Katie. This was her first time stage managing, so it was a good opportunity to do some training with her as well. So a big an aspect of this is the need to be able to hear the actors, for the technicians to hear the actors and one another clearly at the same time, because they need to be able to hear what's going on with the show in order to call instructions at the right time. So Dave Giese in our creative media services suggested using stereo separation for this, so where you route the actors to the left ear of the headphones, and then the control communications to the right ear. So a person listening can more easily distinguish between the actors and the other technicians. Zoom does support stereo audio, and my hope was that we could use it in this fashion so that Zoom would understand the difference between the actors speaking and the technicians speaking. I could not get it enabled on our account. I got technical support involved, like the check boxes don't show up where they're supposed to. It's just couldn't get anywhere with it. And even if I had, I still don't know that Zoom would have necessarily handled the audio the right way. So the other way you could do this is with volume differentiation, right? Just keep the actor volume low but audible, and try to keep those control technical communications a little louder so the technicians can hear each other sufficiently clearly and still be able to make out the actors. The problem is that Zoom doesn't like to let two people talk at the same time. So whenever the stage manager or the operator talked, the actor audio would actually cut out. So anytime the stage manager was saying stand by such and such, at that moment they could not hear what the actors were saying anymore, which is not great. Our stage manager and our operator were dealing with that by being very careful in how they were calling their cues, but it's really not an ideal situation at all. So what naturally a lot of us are finding in this format is that we need to use a separate solution for our technical communications to make sure that it can be isolated and nice and clear and everything from the actors. So we used a separate messaging application. We decided to use Facebook Messenger. You might wonder, like, why not just use a cell phone call for this sort of thing? And in this particular case, we couldn't do that because our operator didn't have cell service at their home, and they had no landline. It's age of cell phones. Who has landlines anymore? So a phone call wasn't really feasible. But also, we need them to be able to still converse with the actors easily and with with other people. So having them sort of isolated in a cell phone call isn't necessarily ideal for that. So what we did is we used the Facebook Messenger desktop application, and we routed the sound from it to and from vMix using virtual patch cords. And you can see that set up on the right here. This is the microphone and the audio setting in Facebook Messenger. And these are my scribblings trying to figure out how we should achieve all of this routing with vMix and Facebook Messenger and Zoom. So essentially what ended up happening is the stage manager and operator used their computers for Zoom to listen to the actors with their headphones, and then they used their smartphones and a separate earbud and mic to communicate in Messenger. So that looked like this. On the left here is our stage manager, Isabel Mendoza, for My Father's Dragon. She's wearing a big pair of headphones to listen to Zoom, listen to the actors, and then she has a separate earbud here from Facebook Messenger that she's using to talk to her operator, Rebecca Straneri over here, who again is also wearing both an earbud and a big pair of headphones to listen to the actors but to talk to each other. And then down here you're seeing the screen sharing. So on the left here is where you share the vMix screen in the Zoom breakout room, and then Rebecca requests remote control of the vMix screen share, and then can go ahead and interact with her with her mouse on her computer. And in general, we found that the screen sharing and the remote control actually worked really well. Even when we experienced some video lags, the audio and the mouse clicks of the go button didn't really lag at all. So it was possible to operate remotely this way. One thing I would just show here too is the stage manager. You see she has a separate microphone here as well that is actually still connected to Zoom. So the key thing here is that the two of them cannot have Zoom and Messenger unmuted at the same time. essentially Zoom remains muted at all times in this context. They only speak through one of the two applications, not both of them. But we did set up a microphone still connected to Zoom for the stage manager, because we could have that prepped as sort of an emergency public address microphone. So if she ever needed to, in an emergency, get on the microphone and talk to the audience, she could mute Messenger and unmute Zoom, and that fast she'd be talking to the audience. And again, My Father's Dragon was a live show, so we needed to be prepared for that sort of thing. Last thing here, if you're dealing with vMix and you're thinking about using a headset for both your control room microphone and monitoring headphones, you might want to rethink that. I chased down problems to do with this for a good week and a half. Take a look at this vMix forum thread. If you can, just completely separate those devices so you don't have a problem with audio bleed. You can read more about it on this slide if you are interested. All right, so we have reached the conclusion of our testing phase of this project, and sort of concluded this phase with a more accurate documentation of the system as we set it up and as we were using it. So this is a diagram showing the structure of our Zoom meeting, and how the breakout rooms relate to the audio coming and going from vMix and all that sort of thing. This is also available as a PDF download. If you want to take a look at it more closely, you can find that there. So this is just a more accurate diagram of the system we actually ended up using. So that concludes this part of the video presentation. The next part will focus on the utilization of the system through the rehearsal and technical rehearsal and performance process.